Okay. Okay, here we are for a lecture on contradictions and the law of non-contradiction. So this is one of the last lectures that I usually give in the basic logic and critical thinking unit of the class. And we've probably covered arguments by now, different types of arguments, fallacies, different kinds of errors that can occur in arguments. And another big error that can occur in an argument is a contradiction or a self-contradiction more specifically. So again, this is one of the ways that a premise could be false, is if if it generates a self-contradiction, or a conclusion line could also be self-contradictory. So again, it's a logical error that could occur in an argument that we got to watch out for. We've already covered a couple of different definitions of philosophy, of course. We've had tried to have a little bit of fun there. So we've got this, idea that philosophy is thinking about thinking. We've got this textbook definition of philosophy that kind of has a more technical side to it that we've been working with is our working definition of philosophy. And recall that it says that philosophy is the intellectual activity of attempting to discern and remove contradictions among non-empirical reasoned beliefs with universal importance, with the resulting benefit of achieving a greater understanding of the world and our place within it. So obviously I'm picking out here for our purposes today the idea of a contradiction, that philosophy involves reflecting upon and trying to identify apparent contradictions amongst our beliefs and then removing them and believing things that are coherent, that are consistent with one another, that don't contradict one another. So one of the readings I usually assign at this point in the semester is by Johnson, and I like to assign it because it introduces this idea of a contradiction. It also covers some potential objections to philosophy itself with its idea of truthiness that I'll come back to here in a second. But at the end of the article, he says, "We've considered many cases of Colbert saying things so profoundly stupid that we realize he must be kidding. In addition, we know that Colbert can't be serious because he has in interviews broken character and admitted to everything, even to being a registered Democrat who loves Democrats." Should have capital D there. Right there and there. Need to fix that. So doing a little editing along the way here. To continue, he says, uh, Johnson says, he has even spoken out against relativism, truthiness, the right to an opinion, and gut thinking. So that's towards the end and the conclusion of the article. And again, he mentions this idea of truthiness from Colbert, the character, this quality of preferring concepts or facts one wishes to be true rather than concepts or facts known to be true. So again, that's one of the attitudes that might count as we'll learn later in the semester, an intellectual or epistemic vice that could get in the way or inhibit philosophical thinking. And then along the way, while he's trying to reach that conclusion that we just went over, he goes over several different ideas: individual relativism, cultural relativism, again, truthiness, and the idea of a right to an opinion. And through most of those, particularly individual relativism, cultural relativism, and the right to an argument, what he's pointing out, what makes them stupid in his word, is they violate the law of non-contradiction. They involve contradiction. So there's a logical problem going on there. So with regard to individual relativism, he says, counting against it, or consider whether Colbert is funny. You think he's hilarious. Your mother doesn't get it, but neither of you is wrong or right. The individual relativist thinks that all truths are like this, right? Again, so there's kind of the key thing, that all truths are like this. But obviously, this cannot be the case. For example, whether or not you exist is not a matter of convention or taste. If someone believes that you don't exist, it's not true for them. Your existence is a matter of fact. They can believe you don't exist, but their belief is false. Relativism, says there are no universal truths. But isn't that the individual relativist trying to establish that individual relativism is universally true? There's a self-referential, self-contradiction problem going on here. So he says, he asks rhetorically, how can it be universally true that there are no universal truths? With regard to cultural moral relativism, which says that moral right and wrong vary according to culture, there are no universal moral truths or values or facts. He says the cultural relativist, like the individual relativist, says that truth is relative. However, The cultural relativist says that the truth is relative to whole cultures rather than to individuals. In the moral realm, the individual relativist says that the majority consensus on morality is a culture defines morality for that culture. For example, if the majority of people in the culture agree that abortion is moral, then abortion is moral for members of that culture. Cultural relativism is tempting because it appears to resolve conflicts. In America, people marry for love. Embracing this view would promote tolerance between the two cultures that have disagreements over, uh, you know, voluntary marriage, or whether it's an arranged marriage or maybe even a forced marriage. Point out radical cultural differences with regard to morality there. Then he continues, contrary to its aims, cultural relativism can actually promote intolerance between cultures. So again, he's pointing out a contradiction here. For example, in the Third Reich in Germany, the oppression of Jews was accepted as moral by the majority. Thus, according to cultural moral relativism, the intolerance of the Nazi Party was morally justified. Of course, you probably don't agree, despite what Colbert's "Child Safe Nazi" video might uh, might convince some to think. And the fact that Valkyrie taught us that there are some good Nazis, end quote there. Clearly, moral relativism is hard to swallow. So again, it's said cultural relativism or cultural moral relativism is said to promote tolerance, but it might just as well promote intolerance, the exact opposite, a contradiction there. And then at the very end of the article, he talks about this right to an opinion argument, and he does a really nice job of showing how to go through an argument and interpret a key idea different ways and try to figure out which one is most likely to be meant in the argument, and then go from there in terms of the analysis. So he says what Colbert probably means is that he has a moral right to his opinion. Moral rights create duties for others. If Colbert has a moral right to his opinion, then you have a corresponding duty to treat his opinion in a certain way. What way? Maybe Colbert thinks that you have a moral duty to agree with his opinion. But if he has a right to his opinion, then you have a right to yours. And that would mean that he's obligated to agree with you. Not only would Colbert never agree with anyone but himself, but given that that the two of you disagree, that doesn't make any sense. So if one person has a right to their opinion and they believe P, and the other person has a right to their opinion and they believe not P, it's not like both of those claims, P and not P, could both be true at the same time in the same respect. So again, what he's pointing out there is a contradiction. What he's trying to show is that Colbert's use of satire is pointing out logical contradictions amongst these beliefs. And so he kind of wraps up talking about the Colbert style of doing philosophy. He mentions that principle of charity, epistemic rights to what's rationally justifiable, and a concern for the truth, and a concern for supporting one's views with good reasons and good evidence. So again, that's basically the opposite of truthiness, which is just believing what you want to believe, regardless of reason or evidence. He emphasized the idea that philosophy is going to require us to abandon unsupported beliefs, remain agnostic where there's insufficient evidence or arguments. He distinguished between truthiness and gut thinking and appeals to intuition. So that's important as well. And then again, he emphasizes the idea that doing philosophy well is going to mean avoiding these sorts of contradictions. And so what he's getting at in each case is the idea of a contradiction here, right? So that's what he's driving at, using this idea, the law of non-contradiction, to evaluate different ideas. So here I have a sign. It says free contradictions $1. And obviously, if it costs $1, it is not free. So because cost $1 implies or entails rather that something is not free, we get a contradiction between free and not free. There's an implicit contradiction here. It's implied because they're not exact opposites, but it's very easy to make them exact opposites by showing that cost $1 is logically equivalent to not free and synonymous with not free. And so then we have our explicit contradiction between those two exact opposite statements that form a negation. So this is the law of non-contradiction. We can state it a couple of different ways. Socrates in the Republic says that the same thing clearly cannot act or be acted upon in the same part or in relation to the same thing at the same time in contrary ways. Aristotle put it a couple of different ways. It's impossible that the same thing belong and not belong to the same thing at the same time in the same respect. So, look, I'm a bald guy. It can't be the case that I'm both bald and have a full head of hair at the same time in the same respect. We have another implicit contradiction there. I can't be bald and not bald. There we'd have an explicit contradiction, right? So again, a little bit more from Aristotle. No one can believe the same thing can at the same time be and not be. What he means is rationally believe there, of course. The most certain of all basic principles of the contradictory propositions cannot be true simultaneously. And then lastly, it's not possible to truly say that the same thing, same time is and is not a man, right? Have to get clear about what we mean there and then go from there. And so Aristotle also gave us our first system of formal logic. It was a syllogistic system of logic, but it helps us illustrate with his traditional square of opposition, the contradictory relationships. It was basically a system made up of four different types of propositions. We've got universal affirmative up here at the top, universal negative over here at the top right, particular affirmative over here in the bottom left quadrant, and over in the right bottom quadrant, affirmative particular. So we've got universal claims up here, particular claims down here, affirmative claims over here, and negative claims over here. And again, no S's of P is the contradiction of some S's are P's. So if universal negative is true, then we know particular affirmative must be false. And if particular affirmative is true, then we know universal negative must be false. They can't both be true and both be false at the same time in the same respect. We've got the same relationship here between universal affirmative and particular negative. So if universal affirmative is true, then then negative particular must be false. And if negative particular is true, then universal affirmative must be false. So they can't both be true at the same time in the same respect. There are other logical relations here as well, but for our purposes, we're just worried about the truth relationships between these contradictory propositions. You can easily look up what a contrary and a subaltern are online or just about in any logic book there. So the next idea we're adding here is a self-contradiction or a self-defeating or self-refuting, self-referentially incoherent, however you want to say that idea. That's any claim or theory or argument that contains a contradiction in the propositions that make up that claim or that theory or that argument. So self-defeating, self-contradictory claims will usually have three features that you can watch for, right? And so again, since contradictions can't be true, we know that these claims or theories, they have to prove themselves false because their truth would require the truth of a contradiction. Since contradictions can't be true, we know these theories have to be false or have false claims in them. All right, so we get a logical falsehood. So again, three basic elements. They'll usually posit some claim, propose something does or doesn't exist, propose a criteria or standard of evaluation. Then the content of that claim has to be self-referential. It has to include itself. So I'm a bald guy, so if I make claims about all bald guys, I'm making a claim that includes me. If I say all bald guys are evil, then I'm making a self-referential claim that I'm implying that I'm also evil because I'm in the category of all bald guys. On its own, a self-referential statement is not contradictory, but if it meets this third one, if it fails to meet its own standard, then we got a self-contradiction. So again, it proposes some standard. That standard would apply to itself, the same content. In other words, the content of the statement applies to itself. That's like, again, if I make a statement about all statements, that includes that statement about all statements, right? And then it violates the law of non-contradiction. And so if it proposes a standard, it's self-referential, and doesn't meet that standard, so it violates the law of non-contradiction, then we got a self-contradiction. We know that claim or theory must be false. Then let's recall individual relativism from the article and apply what we've just learned about contradictions, the law of non-contradiction, to relativism in a more kind of precise way. So we've got individual relativism. It's the claim that there are no universal truths. So let's call that claim not you. Not you is also itself a declarative statement. So declarative statements declare something is the case. They make a truth assertion. It can be true or false, but they make truth assertions. Not you is also, notice, a universal statement itself. It makes a claim about universals, and it's a universal claim itself. So it's self-referential. So not you asserts there are no universal truths, but not you asserts a universal truth itself. So if there are no universal truths is true, that would mean there are some universal truths is also true, namely the truth of that statement itself. Well, that violates our law of non-contradiction, right? So it can't be the case that not you applies the truth of you. There we got a single statement that generates and implies the truth of another statement that it is in direct contradiction with that statement itself. We got a self-contradiction. That's what he's pointing out here in that passage again by saying, but isn't the individual relativist trying to establish individual relativism is universally true? How can that be the case? That's what he's pointing out there, self-contradiction. So some concluding remarks then. That idea of philosophy that we begin with emphasizes identifying and avoiding contradictions, right? So doing philosophy well is going to involve avoiding just blatant contradictions in our views and in the arguments we produce and in between the positive views that we have and the criticisms of other views, right? Big web of beliefs that we are looking to try to make coherent and consistent. So we've covered this idea of a contradiction, the law of non-contradiction, and self-contradiction. Self-contradictions can be, again, generated by a single statement combined with its logical implications that are the exact opposite. A self-contradiction can also occur between two different statements in a single argument, theory, or hypothesis there. You'd still have a self-contradiction there. But if two different people are in conflict with one another, one's arguing P and one's arguing not P, that's not really a self-contradiction. That's a contradiction between two opposing views, right? All right, so there's a little bit on the law of non-contradiction. That's going to pop up quite a bit. Sometimes it pops up in criticisms of philosophy itself. So a lot of people want to dismiss philosophy because they don't think it has any answers. It doesn't really make any progress, but then they want to argue over what counts as a catch in the NFL, which looks like a philosophical issue. So it turns out to be pretty hard to make a plausible criticism of philosophy as a whole that doesn't presuppose some truth about philosophy there. So that can be a problem that you run into with various criticisms of all sorts of different views, not just philosophy itself. So there we go, law of non-contradiction. Hope that helps. Ask questions in class if you need additional help. Y'all have a good one, and we'll see you in the next video.